Welcome back, boxing fans, to another great show with Sean on boxing. So I see JB is in his emotions once again, acting as if because he has an opinion, it automatically is correct and everybody needs to follow suit, right? He's a guy that historically could never accept a non-black fighter as pound for pound number one. So much so that when Bud Crawford became undisputed against Julius Indongu, because he was becoming undisputed, it automatically meant he was going to become pound for pound number one, right? Yet when other fighters became undisputed, it didn't elevate them to the number one ranking, right? Isn't it ironic? Well, it's not ironic, because people like him will justify and say whatever they can to try to shoehorn a fighter into a position that they think they deserve to be in, right? But yet they will then try everything they can in their power to downplay and dismiss somebody else that other people feel deserves to be in that position. And that's what this comes down to. It's cool that John feels that Bud Crawford is pound for pound number one. I think when you talk about Inoue, Usyk, and Bud Crawford, there's a small difference between all of them. They all are in the conversation. A lot of the reason guys have moved up and down the list is based on victories they've had and how busy they've been, right? I had Inoue become pound for pound number one, but then when Crawford beat Spence in such a fantastic style, I put him pound for pound number one. But then you just had Usyk not only beat Anthony Joshua 2 fights in a row, but then beat Daniel Dubois, which obviously is aging great now, and then went on and beats, Tyson Fury, a man that weighed well over 40 pounds more than him. Like, that is ultimately what the pound for pound is about. When you try to think about fighters coming up in weight, fighting guys that are bigger than them, but having the skill set to still be able to overcome the odds, right? Talking about how, if these guys were all the same size, obviously this guy would win. Well, if Alexander Usyk was the same size as Tyson Fury, he would have fucking destroyed him, right? Because he almost knocked him out, and he was giving up every advantage in height, in reach, and size, right? And now we're going to get, of course, the rematch, and that could obviously change everything. If Tyson Fury wins the rematch, then this is going to elevate Bud Crawford back onto my list at number one. Because because a pound for pound list is what it is, it doesn't mean you stay on this list indefinitely because of things you've done in the past. Pound for pound lists consistently adjust and change based on activity and what fighters are doing today. You can't crown somebody a pound for pound fighter and never take him off the list. Like, I also don't agree with Ring IQ, right? He feels that if a fighter who's older ends up winning a title in this day and age, even if it's against a subpar competitor, that elevates him back onto the pound for pound list based on what he's done historically. But you're not on current day pound for pound list based on what you did historically. It's based on what you're doing today. Are you still the number one fighter in boxing? Are you still the most dominant fighter in boxing? The only reason people know this is based on what you're doing today. That's why Canelo Alvarez has slipped from being pound for pound number one all the way to number 4 or 5 on most people's lists and on my list, right? I have him obviously below Crawford, Usyk, Inoue, and Beterbiev, and have him at 5, potentially 6 if you want to put Bam Rodriguez above him. I still think at this point it's a little premature, so you have Canelo at 5, Bam at 6, Tank at 7, and then Junta Nakatani at 8, and so on and so forth. But with this guy, the problem isn't based on really what people are doing in the sport of boxing. It's based on his feelings and the fact that he feels that blacks are superior to non-blacks, not just in boxing, but in everything. This is literally how he feels. Literally, in his community page, he's put plenty of things stating this in the past, right? So it's no surprise he feels this way. That's the difference between his narrative and mine. I've never said that white people are superior to anybody. There's great whites in all kinds of fields around the world, just like there's great Asians and blacks and Indians and Middle Easterns and everybody else. Everybody is well represented across the board in different fields. in boxing, because of how it's become so much more global over the last little while, we're getting a lot of influx of boxers from around the world. And it's really making the sport more diverse than it was in the past. This is not a bad thing, and this is not anti anybody. I mean, if you can't see why some people would have Usyk, their number one fighter, pound for pound, that's probably a you thing. If you can't understand why people are super enamored with Inui and what he's done, that once again is probably a you thing. Just because you don't agree with them doesn't mean they're wrong. And it doesn't mean they're haters, that they're racists, just because their opinion is not the same as yours. Right? This is the problem when you talk to people like this. It's that mentality that if you're not with me, you're against me. This is what the LDBC became synonymous with. Either you agree with us or you're against us. Literally, this referred to everybody. Boxers, people in the sport, trainers, media members, and just casual YouTubers, right? If Sean Porter came out and had a different opinion than the LDBC, all of a sudden he became a coon, a sellout, and they threw his ass under the bus. Yet when he agrees with them, then they embrace him in their warm embrace once again. I mean, this is how fickle these guys are, because they fail to understand that, yeah, people are going to have a different opinion than you. And that's okay. When you used to go to the barber shop, people had different opinions. That's why there was debates and arguments and back and forth, because people don't always agree on everything. But with a guy like JB, this is the problem. If you don't agree with him, then he's going to label you as a racist, right? And then he makes it sound like it's everybody else. No, it's clearly you, because you're the one so fixated on the color issue. Like, you want to talk about what Bud Crawford has done by becoming undisputed in 2 weight classes, and because he did it first, obviously that means he is elevated above Inui and Usyk. Well, what does him doing it first have to do with anything? Who did he do it against? What's his resume, right? It's the process. What has he done recently? He had 2 good wins over the last, 2 years? Obviously against Spence, who since then hasn't bounced back. So we have no idea, what kind of shape he's in. If he bounced back and had a good win against Banduro, that would elevate that victory even more. But at this point, people kind of say that Spence was washed up and shot. And this isn't haters. This is literally Errol Spence fanboys, right? The same people who literally spent 5 years criticizing and dismissing and hating on Bud Crawford's resume. And the majority of them are Black Americans. Errol Spence fans, anti-Bud Crawford. This has nothing to do with me. This is the narrative they pushed for 5 years to try to defend and justify why they had Errol Spence the number 1 fighter at welterweight. But Bud Crawford was pound for pound number 1. I don't understand how that works out, but okay. Right? When you think about what Usyk did at cruiserweight, right? Beating literally all 4 champions, and then beating Tony Bellew, who was the lineal champion. So literally 5 champions to become undisputed, right? And obviously we've seen some of the fighters that he beat in the process, right? Like Briedis. Marius Briedis is a phenomenal fighter, right? Phenomenal fighter. And you could look at Bud Crawford's resume and who he fought at 140, and I guarantee there's nobody at 140 that matches up to Marius Briedis. 0, zilch, nada, not fucking one. Right? And that was just one champion that he fought at cruiserweight. And then, of course, he's come to heavyweight. And he likes to talk about how, people got these fighters on the list at number 1, yet they don't even know who the guys are that these guys fought. They need to look it up. You can't have a debate with them, even though we have debates constantly about it. But he ignores it because that's what he does, right? That's the funny thing. When people say people don't even know who they are, they can't even list who they are, they can't even debate and talk about what these people have done. Yet then you do it and they act like it doesn't exist, that nobody's made those videos, nobody's had this conversation. Right? And this just shows your American-centric mentality, because you're fanboying for fighters because they fight in the States, and you're familiar with them only because they fight in the States. right? If you lived in Japan, you may not be very familiar with those opponents. You may be far more familiar with the opponents that Inouye's fought. But this is the sort of simple-minded mentality some people take. And in the case of Usyk, you can't say this. You can't try to downplay the opponents he faced and try to act like people don't know who they are and people can't list who they are and people are unfamiliar with them. Because literally he moves up to heavyweight and fought people that people are very aware of, right? Guys like Chisora coming off of great wins, even at this age of his career. Daniel Dubois just became an IBF world champion by destroying Anthony Joshua very unexpectedly. Of course, 2 wins versus Anthony Joshua, who at the time was a 3-belt unified heavyweight champion. And then, of course, Tyson Fury, the man that exposed Deontay Wilder, was the first guy to really open up the heavyweight doors by beating Klitschko and allowing sort of all these heavyweights to actually get involved. Because obviously when Klitschko was the champion, there wasn't much going on in the heavyweight division. Thanks to Tyson Fury, this changed. But you're going to act like the guys Usyk fought and beat are unnameable, fighters nobody's familiar with? I mean, come on. You got to get over yourself. You got to get over your narrative. Like literally you make that video, all of his response to me and what I said in a live. Because literally you hang on every word that I say. It's kind of stockish. And the reality is, why can't people have different opinions? I don't hate on you because you have Bud Crawford as pound for pound #1 on your list because he's a black American. That's why you have him there. Just like before him, you had Andre Ward. And before him, you had Floyd Mayweather, right? Floyd Mayweather, who even when he was retired for 2 years, you probably still had him pound for pound #1, even though he retired. Andre Ward, who hadn't fought in more than a year and a half and basically was semi-retired. But then he deserves to be pound for pound #1. And then you criticize Golovkin for being pound for pound #1 after having a draw versus Canelo Alvarez, a pound for pound fighter. But yet you praise Andre Ward for having a robbery victory against Kovalev and use that to justify him being pound for pound #1, as if there's a difference. The difference is public opinion felt Golovkin beat Canelo. Public opinion felt that Kovalev beat Andre Ward, right? But the difference is you don't like Golovkin because he's a Caucasian fighter who you spent your whole career hating on, and you like Andre Ward because he's a black American like you. And when Bud Crawford retires, everybody knows inevitably you're going to try to jam another black American fighter into that pound for pound position, not based on actually doing anything significant, but because you can't accept anyone that's not black being #1 in the sport of boxing. That's why you're trying to push Devin Haney in that direction, pushing him to #2 on your pound for pound list, even though literally you're the only person in the world that had Devin Haney pound for pound #2, literally, right? And the biggest Devin Haney haters have been Tank Davis fans. But then again, you're going to chalk it up all to racists. But this is all black Americans. The same people who supported Spence and hated Crawford are the same ones supporting Tank Davis and hating on Devin Haney for the most part. Right? But again, with you, it's always about race. People can't have any different opinion. People that live in Europe and Asia and have a complete different mentality than you, a different, being brought up in a different community, a different culture, watch sports in a different way, in a different language, somehow they still need to agree with you that Bud Crawford has to be pound for pound #1 and anything different is wrong. But yet it's everybody else that's at fault, not you. The one that is so diehard in your beliefs that everyone has to kowtow to your thoughts and can't have their own feelings or opinions. You know, this is why I'm not religious, because this is what religious people do, right? Catholics try to browbeat you into following their religion, because if you don't follow their religion, you're wrong and you're a sinner and you're going to hell. Muslims do the same thing. The only ones who don't really do that, which is why I'm more geared towards them, are Buddhists. In fact, I mean, you're not going to have too many Buddhists try to jam their religion down your throat, which is a really pleasant thing. Because, you know, if you want to be a positive role model, you live a positive life. And people are going to follow you because they see what you're doing and they gravitate towards it. They don't need you to browbeat them, use guilt, and try to fucking, you know, make them feel bad because they have a different opinion than you do. But this is a father of children. So you can only imagine, like, what he's teaching kids. If this is the way he thinks you're supposed to talk to people and treat people. I live in Asia. I teach kids that come from a completely different culture than me. I'm not trying to browbeat these kids to have the same beliefs that I have coming from Canada, because obviously their culture, their experience, their language is different than mine. And see, that's something that JB could benefit from. Traveling a little bit, using a little bit of his money to actually get his ass outside the US so that he'd see a different perspective of the world. But unfortunately, most people that have big mouths and strong opinions, unfortunately, are uneducated and you know, haven't traveled and experienced other cultures very much. That's why they can be so ignorant in their perspective. Right? You can go check out his video, listen to it for yourself, and make up your own opinion. Because the truth is, if you have the same opinion of him, or a different opinion, maybe you have Inui or somebody else at number one, maybe Canelo, or if you have Usyk, like me at number one, I mean, it's your opinion. It's no different than having a pound for pound list that has different people than other people have on the list. The only problem is when people blatantly show how biased they are, yet are hypercritical of other people. And that's the only thing I'm pointing out. The hypercritical double standard coming from people like him. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Let me know who you think is pound for pound number one.